Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our Let's Talk About It series. Today, we have two cast members of The Tempest, which is our free Shakespeare in the Park going on this year. And we also have two designers from the show to talk with Dan and myself. Um, Please share in the chat where you all are zooming in from. Personally, myself, I am zooming in from the land of the Tamian Nation of Santa Clara County, the land of the Muwekma Ohlone people. And welcome. If this is your first time in to be a part of these, let's talk about, throw up some emojis, y'all. Put in a heart. Put in a heart if this is your first time.
And put in two
Ooh,
if it's your second or third.
I know. Maybe like what should we do for folks who are definitely been here?
Regulars are regulars.
Yeah, our regulars. Yes. NYC. We've got people from NYC. Yes, there you go, Ray. I haven't figured out how to get my computer to do those lovely things. Yes, yes. Thank you, Ed. Yeah. Well, then we've got a lot of folks here who know the deal. We're so glad to have you here. And without further ado, I will talk a little bit more about what we've got going on. We have had let's talk about it Zoom discussion with our director of the Tempest, Rotimi Agbabiaka. We've had a conversation with incredible Shakespeare scholar Dr. Farah Kareem Cooper, and next Monday, September 9th at 12 noon, we're going to have a talk about with Dr. Roland Green from the English department in Stanford University. I'm really excited about that. And without further ado, let's start this conversation, Dan.
Great. Well, first, welcome everybody. I'll add my voice to Carla's to welcome all of our friends, supporters, and fellow Shakespeareans. Carla and I, when we were talking about how to put these programs together, we've done a couple which really focused on the play and the role the play occupies in the broader arc of all of Shakespeare's work, and on a very wonderful and insightful conversation with Rotimi Agbabiaka, the wonderful young director of this production. What we thought would be interesting today was to actually take all of our friends and supporters behind the scenes, as it were, and actually introduce you to two of our great artistic contributors, both the sound and music person, Jen Coogan, the costume director, Bethany Deal, and then two of our wonderful actors, Nick Moore and David Moore. We didn't choose it by last names, but as it turns out, that made things very easy, at least for all of us. So what we thought we would do is we're going to talk just a little bit with each of these people in sequence, starting with Jen Coogan for sound and music, then moving to Bethany for costumes, and then moving to Nick Moore for acting, and then to David Moore for acting. And then we will reserve plenty of time at the end of our hour. And if we stretch over a little bit, we invite you to stay with us for questions. And in the questions, everybody is just going to jump in and answer the questions as they wish and as the spirit moves them. So welcome to everybody. And I want to start, I think, with Jen. And Jen, although we have circulated your formal biography to everybody, and it's in the link is in our, oh, that's true, by the way, for everybody. And they're in the programs as well for the show. But I wanted to start with some of the more informal aspects of the biography. You and I have talked about this before, and I thought it would be nice to share some of the life events that brought you to music and sound design, probably beginning in Las Vegas.
Yes.
So do tell us a little bit about that, if you would. How did you and your husband actually meet each other? And
Well,
I hasten to add for our audience, this is actually relevant to our discussion.
yeah, so I grew up as a performer, and I went to college in Las Vegas. And while I was in college, I got a job working at the Venetian Hotel as a singing gondolier. And my husband was also a singing gondolier, and he was one of the people that train you to how to row the boats and everything. So we literally met rowing gondolas next to each other and singing Italian love songs.
I think that's actually, I can't imagine a more perfect introduction to a life spent in musical theater and operetta. I just think that's absolutely ideal, Jen. And I remember another epiphany, though, coming across the Golden Gate Bridge. And I'd love you to share that a little bit, because that one actually leads very directly to what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, so my husband and I, we were performers, and we at one point we were living in Lake Tahoe. We sold everything we owned after doing rent, and we realized that we needed to just follow our artistic dreams. La Vie Boheme, No Day But Today really resonated with us. So we moved to San Francisco, and I was songwriting and playing music. And then one day I was driving across the bridge, and Hamilton came on, and I just started sobbing. And I said to my husband, I need to be writing musical theater. And it really changed my life. I felt like it was finally like finding my destiny in a way.
You know, it's interesting when we spoke with Rotimi Agbabiaka, he and I talked a little bit about the original scoring and the original composing for this play. This play was written towards the end of Shakespeare's, it is probably the last play that he wrote by himself. It was written towards the end of his theater career. It's the last of the four great romances. And he commissioned the great songs from a young man who had been the the son of a very musical Elizabethan family, and had then been an indentured musical servant in the household of the Lord Chamberlain, who was in fact the patron at that point of Shakespeare's theater troupe. So there are so many parallels, because it was also a talented young composer who had decided this was what he wanted to do, working with Shakespeare and writing these songs. So tell us a little bit about your first meeting with Rotimi and what you guys were discussing, and how it was that you guys started to settle on the wonderful combination of songs and percussion that really drive this production forward.
Right. Well, I'm actually one of two composers on this project. My partner, Justin Reyna, also worked on this alongside me. And that's because after talking to Rotimi initially, he told me that he wanted it to have like a real African percussion kind of feel, a lot of world music influences. And most of my strengths lay on the vocal composition side. So I brought in Justin. He's an excellent percussionist, and he has a real well-versed feeling of drums and of world music in general. So we teamed up together, and we got with Rotimi, and he really laid us out a step-by-step idea of what he was looking for with every song. And he gave us a lot of influences, a lot of Caribbean music, a lot of African music, some a cappella stuff. And it was kind of like Caribbean Vacation meets African drumming, meets like a spirituality journey. And so we tried to compile that all together one by one, and Justin and I just kind of went through, and Rotimi had given us specific influences for every single song that we wrote. So we were able to really dive into that music and figure out like what's working in this song that could also work for our show. What kind of vibe does this portray? And how would this help lend a good voice to the Tempest?
Well, I think I can say as an engaged audience member, you've succeeded admirably in this. And
Thank you.
I love the mixture of what Rotimi was suggesting and what you and Justin brought to this, in the sense that the music really does convey this sense of a remote, magical isle that's far apart from the rest of the world, with all of these different influences playing their part in that differentiation. And the other thing that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is, you wound up with a cast who can sing very well, Jen. I mean, did you start with that idea, or is that a discovery that you made as you went along?
So when I start these projects, I've noticed that they always kind of give me a caveat of, we don't necessarily know the caliber of voices that we're going to have for these. They're obviously all hired for their acting capabilities first. So we try to be prepared on our end to have things that are a little bit loose. We can kind of work with people. Maybe it's not super difficult, but it can be if those skills are there. And so I really had no idea walking into it what kind of voices we were going to be having for this production. And so when I came to the first rehearsal and I had some conversations with people and I heard people sing, and it was kind of a big relief to hear how capable all the voices were, and just to know that they would be able to sing what we had written and we wouldn't have to, go back and make it work for their voice. We switched some things around as far as like vocal range and things like that. But as far as like musical capabilities and people staying on pitch and knowing rhythms and everything, we really had a good group of people that already seemed to kind of know their way around that field a bit. So
Well,
I'd say we got lucky.
I would say the audience got lucky in this, Jen. They really, the cast did a wonderful job with that. And I loved, just speaking personally, I loved the way the percussionist wove all of these different strands together in the production. It sounds simple only at first hearing, but you can tell how complex the artistic work that you and Justin did to get this thing up and running and together to implement Rotimi's vision. It was just terrific.
Yeah, I think we got really lucky. Phoebe is an amazing percussionist, and through the whole thing, she remained solid and also told us, what she needed on her end. And we did a little bit of finagling as far as like how much music is going to go on the track, how much is Phoebe going to add on top of that, and finding a way to let those work together without overwhelming each other. And yeah, we've been really lucky to have Phoebe and her capable hands to make it all come together.
Well, and the other side of the coin is true as well. The cast was lucky to have you as well. So Bethany, now that we've talked a little bit about music and the Enchanted Isle, let's talk a little bit about the amazing costumes that you put together for this show. Help us understand a little bit about your background, and then about your first meeting with Rotimi and how you work on this question of costume design with the director when you're starting the production up.
Yes, absolutely. So I have a master's in costume design with a secondary in hair and makeup. I went to Utah State University for my master's degree, and then I have an undergraduate degree at Cal State Long Beach. I kind of fell into theater. I told you, that was like a previous conversation, but it wasn't my initial game plan. I was going to go into pharmacy, so I don't know what happened, but I love where I'm at. So,
well, CVS's loss is our gain, Bethany.
Right. But I fell into it, and then there was no looking back once I had gone into the waters. And in grad school is kind of where I really narrowed down how I do my process. as a designer. And so I obviously like I need something from the director just to begin. I can't just like go on my own little ideas.
Right.
Because as creative, we all have our own ideas, but like ultimately it's Rotimi's vision. So I try to get some sort of like path from the director, and Rotimi had given us this, magical island as we're talking about. And he had been really interested in like the idea of refugees and people coming from different places and kind of getting displaced, if you will, onto these different places. And so he gave me some guidelines as far as like, okay, I want it to be, sort of these type of like, as far as the people that are there, Miranda and Prospero, like island people. And then he was very adamant that the all the royalty that's like, displaced onto the island is Wall Street, like blue suits Wall Street.
Right.
And so he kind of gave me like a little guide, and then I took that from there. And the first thing that I do is I start looking up art. I like look up art that I think represents the mood or the feeling of the show, with the director's guidance in there. So I found a lot of really great island paintings and actually some Aboriginal like creative art stuff. And I use those and I kind of gather those together, and that will actually usually get me my color palette. Like it kind of just like naturally happens where once I get all these images together, I kind of am inspired.
So
Usually,
Bethany, let me just interrupt for a second, because this is something very interesting. So you're actually not starting with art of costumes or fashion art. You're actually starting with just representational and sometimes even abstract art to start you off. That's fascinating.
Yeah, a lot of my images for this were very abstract. Because of the type of show it is. I did have some like Tempest paintings with the boats and the waves, because that absolutely gives us the feel of the show. This was one of those shows where Rotimi actually also gave me specific colors. Generally, I get to choose, or I have more control in that department. But he was very specific that he wanted Prospero in rust or warm tones, and then Ariel would be white, like airy and flowy, and Miranda was like sea blues, sea foam and seaweed and stuff. So I had those guidelines as well, and he even gave me different like shells and for each of these people, and so I put those in my research as well, which helped guide the colors. I think a challenge that I had was, okay, if everyone's in blue suits, how do you make them unique? And so I worked really hard on like, okay, they have to be individual, they have to be different blues, they have to really speak to the personality of the character and show the variations of levels of wealth as well. So that's why you see Alonso having like the badge and the chain and the embroidery and the rhinestones to kind of show that Alonso is the king, right? But then you get Gonzalo, who's just like in a polo with a blazer, no tie, so the variation was important.
And when you've come up with these specific ideas addressing each character, what happens at that point? Do you take them to Rotimi and go over them, and then what happens? How does it get from there to these wonderful outdoor stages that we use?
Absolutely. So I usually compile what I call a design package. Some shows I will do renderings. I didn't for this one because we weren't building anything. So if we're not building anything from scratch, it's not really necessary to do a rendering. So I compile it into a presentation, and I'll start with like all that art images I found, and then I will go into the fashion. I will then find the fashion that and this was contemporary, so and I had those Wall Street blue suits and things like that. And then I narrow it down, like it files down into each character, and then I have the images for each character, and that's what I present. And the cast sees it, Rotimi approves it first, and then we use that as our basis to like start sourcing and finding everything. So I did have help, which was great. I had Lee, who helped me, and two interns, Natalie and Rebecca, who are fabulous, and kind of helped me mostly with fittings and things like that. But Lee did help me with some of the pulling. So like I went to SF Shakes' stock and pulled what I could from their stock. I pulled from a couple other places, including my own stock, which I have quite an extensive stock at this point. Once I pull everything I can pull, because like we want to try to we want to try to source it first before we go buy it, right? Like, is it in the world already? Does it exist in the color and the size and the time period, which can be very difficult for the person? Then I start making a shopping list. Then I start sourcing things, either online or in person, and getting those in. Then once all of that is together, all the pieces of the pie are together, then you start fittings and you start putting them into the garments. And then, well, most often there's going to be alterations that come out of that. And for like this show, I got to be a little creative with our goddesses.
I'll say.
It was very funny because Rotimi was like, the image that he gave me was the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And if anybody knows that amazing group, I was like, amazing. But how do they do it in 30 seconds? That's impossible, because I'm also working within the constraints of our show and how it's been cast and how much time people have to go from character to character to character. So I had to kind of noodle on like, well, how do I do fabulous drag in 30 seconds? And I brought it to Rotimi in like one of our second or third meetings. I was like, here's an idea. What if I do like big exaggerated sunglasses? So that's the makeup, right? Like with rhinestones and things like that. And then, I have a lot of drag queen friends and they tend to spend some time in Palm Springs and they wear glorious caftans when they spend their time in Palm Springs. And so I was like, what if they're like fun, flowy, big caftans that are easily to put on? And then some sort of like headdress that like gives us the wig that we can't do. And he was like, yes, absolutely. And so that's where I got to like have fun. And I built the rainbow caftan for Iris. And I ended up shopping Ceres's, but then I added all of that sequin onto Ceres's caftan. And Juno's, I actually was able to pull and just like augment. It was something that I had found. It was literally like a priest's robe that was in the East Base, Cal State East Base stock that had sequins on the back already. So then I just made the stole that went with it. And Juno's headdress, I had bought for $5 years ago just because it looked cool, like the base of the headdress at this like reuse place. Because I'm a weird costume person, I was like, that'll come in handy at some point. And how
right you were. So now wait a minute. I need to ask Nick the most important question about all of this, Bethany, which is, Nick, how much pushback do the actors give when Bethany is getting you into the costumes?
So it's interesting because when we were blocking the show and I was seeing like, okay, cool, I'm gonna have the last line of the scene as Trinculo and then the first line of the next scene as Ferdinand, I was thinking I better have just like something I can throw over, like a shawl or something, better be it. But Bethany did a really lovely job of making each costume very accessible. And of course, the interns backstage, not just the costume interns, but the stage management and the prop interns who are jumping in to help with changes have been so lovely that like at this point, I'm not stressed anymore with those super quick changes. I mean, everything's got snaps, so you can just rip everything off, throw the next thing on, run back on stage. We're underdressing like half the costumes. Right. So it actually hasn't, I didn't give any pushback because I was just trusting the process, and I was smart to trust the process because it was.
So Nick, so this raises a really interesting question because you're playing both Ferdinand and Trinculo, and Ferdinand, this wonderful, newly lovesick swain, the greatest of all the speakers of his language, or so he thinks, while he thinks his father is dead. And then who is in a sense sort of the romantic engine of this, the young man who is so smitten he would carry the wood to the ends of the earth for Miranda. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're this drunken loutish sailor. Tell us a little bit about the doubling and how that feels to you as an actor in a play like this.
Yeah, so the doubling was a little intimidating at first because I got this, I wanted to dive so deep into one character, and it's hard to like be sitting backstage and getting into the mind space of Ferdinand when I have to get off stage and then have 2 seconds to jump back on as Ferdinand. And so what I started with was actually it came from Bethany's costume packet and Rotimi's notes. I was sent like a week before rehearsal started a picture of the costume concept for Trinculo and for Ferdinand, and then just like 3 notes from Rotimi on each character. And I thought, oh, okay, these are totally different people. They walk different, they talk different, they have completely different worldviews, and so it became, while I was still doing all of that work of filling out the world and filling out who these people are, I still like it became really simple to just turn one off, turn the next on, and I could do that in like a little 2 second space eventually, which was really, really lovely.
Well, it's interesting because what you're describing is such a direct hearkening back to the way these plays were presented at the Globe itself. You know, the usual Shakespeare play has 25 or 26 characters, and a typical Globe performance would have 14, maybe 15 actors involved. And so the doubling is, it goes right back to the Elizabethan performance standards for which these plays were written and
Yeah.
from which these plays emerged. So it must be fascinating. What's it like to move to playing out of doors in shared light, shared sound with no barriers between
Yeah.
you and the audience? And that must be intimidating for an actor.
It's a little intimidating, but it's also really, really freeing. I mean, first of all, you don't have to find your lights. Like, I don't have to worry about standing in the wrong place and being out of the spotlight,
Right.
which is really comforting. Also, there's this lovely openness with the audience, like the same way Shakespeare would have done it at the Globe Theater. There's no fourth wall. The audience is right there, especially right now we're in Redwood City, and the audience is just inches away from
Right.
our feet,
Right.
sitting on their picnic blankets. And so there's really moments for real human connection with those people in the audience. My like general policy doing outdoor Shakespeare is that the audience has all the answers to any question or problem I'm having on stage. So if I just take a moment and look out at someone in the audience, someone out there is going to be feeling the thing, giving me the impulse that I need to keep going. So it's really lovely having that no wall between us, being able to just communicate and share these stories and see the active feedback in the moment.
Well, it takes, I will say from the outside, with great admiration for you and David's work, it takes a very confident actor who is deeply engaged in his or her characters to be able to pull that off with, in shared light and sound. It's a remarkable feat. When you came to this production, um, and I'm, sort of hearkening back even to the cold read, as you look back now, having performed many times and very successfully. I think a lot of the audience members online now know, as I do, how successful it has been. Um, as you look back on this, in your own process, what are some of the things that you're going to take away from this production? What are some of the things that you learned from Rotimi and from the production and from your colleagues in this? I'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I have 2 things on that. The first is from Rotimi, I've learned a much deeper appreciation of Shakespeare's verse. As like a contemporary actor, I feel like I often just try to tear apart the verse and turn it into something much more understandable. For example, at the beginning of the log scene, I say, "There be some sports are painful and their labor delight in them sets off." I'm like, that's a normal sentence, but Shakespeare doesn't write it that way. He writes it, "There be some sports are painful and their labor delight in them sets off." And Rotimi was very strict about like us paying attention to those line endings, paying attention to the meter and the rhythm, and us all getting on that rhythm. And well, at first it was really difficult and challenging for me. Eventually, I started making so many discoveries about what those line endings could mean and what those what could be placed in those moments, and also just discoveries of realizing what it felt like the effervescence that comes from just being on that rhythm with the other actor and moving in that same in that same meter with one another. So that's something I'm definitely going to take into my future acting in Shakespeare work. And then the other thing was based on the uh, the time of the production. How this is an hour and 40-minute production of The Tempest, where the last production I saw was 3 hours and 10 minutes at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So with that though, one thing I was noticing, and I noticed this working with Kevin Clark, who plays Ariel, because Kevin would have all these ideas of tiny little nuances to throw in to moments. And I started realizing that when you're constricting the time down, actually, I think it, in many ways, makes the play more full, because we're not languishing in moments that are generalized and confused. We're making everything very specific. We're trying to pack as much language and characterization and nuance into every little moment, so that 140 minutes can contain as much information as the 3.5 hours that another production would be.
Right. One of the things that comes across so well in this production is this sort of marvelous freshness and intensity of the relationship between Ferdinand and Miranda. And that's just, that really just, it's an axial point of the play, that these two young people are really sort of off in their own sub-world almost instantaneously. How do you carry that off? How do you make that magic happen, Nick?
Well, first of all, I have like such a wonderful actor to play opposite Alex Camerino. Is just amazing.
Yes, he is wonderful. He really is.
So that's really lovely. And then on top of that, I also feel there's this wonderful innocence, and it's almost like Eden-like, the relationship between Ferdinand and Miranda, or there's so many mythical parallels, Dido and Aeneas, Adam and Eve, to these two people in this sort of neutral, not abandoned, but desert place,
right.
Finding one another. And one thing I like use to fill in, because it's always like a hurdle for an actor who plays a lot of ingenues, to like, how do you fall in love with someone in 2 seconds? One of the things I used to fill in that was, I started thinking about the circumstance that I as Ferdinand am in, coming to this island. I've just lost everything, and I've lost everything that I love, and of course I'm gonna look for somebody or something to hold on to, and something to give my life meaning again. And that person is this goddess that I see on this island, Miranda, and I'm gonna serve her. And I think that's a beautiful thing also, is that every character in this play is so focused on what their social status is and who serves underneath them. And Ferdinand and Miranda are two people who are like, no, I'll serve you and you serve me, and we don't care whether we're princes, kings, queens of the island, whatever we are, as long as we're together. I think that's a beautiful thing.
I love the way you put that, and that is just the absolutely perfect segue into David, because David's character is actually intensely focused on the question of who's in charge here, and how did that actually come about. David, thank you for joining us. The question that I had for you was, in your doubling, you're playing two characters who are in many respects not just profoundly different, the way, say, Ferdinand and Trinculo are, but who are profoundly morally different. The way, and in a sense, you're playing a dark character at one point, the usurping brother who is still plotting, and at the same time, you're playing this guy who's got his cummerbund up around his neck and barely can get himself out of bed. How do you just do that, I guess, is the question, David.
I mean, okay, so first off, I have to say it is wild to me that the cummerbund bit is catching people as much as it is, because I've had like several people like, I love the cummerbund bit. That was just something that I thought was going to be fun. Like the drinker he gets, the higher it goes. But like I didn't know it was gonna...
it's really good, David. It's really good.
But so that's one thing. It's been blowing my mind. I'm like, I didn't realize it was going to catch on that much. But yeah, so The two things that are so different, I think, with these two is that it's about what is the word goals, I suppose, because Antonio, having been given the opportunity to run Milan while Prospero was in his libraries, he realizes, oh, number one, I'm good at this. Number two, I think I'm better at this than he is. And of course, number three, there has always been, I think there's something about, for him being the younger brother who he feels like was never properly recognized, and feels like he's owed more than he's been given. And so he's willing to do whatever it takes to seize his opportunity because that's what he deserves.
Yes.
And I think with Stefano, I don't, I I think he's a person who's sort of fine where he is, but does sort of he does see, being a servant to the king, he does see all that pomp and circumstance, and just and thinks, gosh, wouldn't that be cool? He doesn't understand all the politics of everything, but then when this opportunity arrives and someone's like, I'm gonna worship you, you're gonna be king, and it's like, well, that sounds fun, cool, let's do that.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
yeah, there isn't this sort of like drive for power. It's just like, okay, cool, let's do it.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I've always thought that in a sense, you raise a really important point, I think, in the sense that to me, there's a kind of inherent ambiguity in the text because, we actually see Prospero confessing that he didn't pay any attention to the dukedom while he was duke, and that he spent all of his time wrapped up in his esoteric magical studies. And I'm always left with this question of, like the other guy the brother may actually have been a much better duke than Prospero was. It's an interesting question, and you managed to convey that in a terrific way in your presentation of the brother, because the brother is not actually abashed at what he's done with the dukedom in your presentation. I thought that was really terrific.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's we one of the it wasn't even like a planned exercise, but one of the things that just really just enriched, not just my work, but the relationship between Prospero and Antonio, is that the actor Idris and I we'd just be talking, we'd be like in between bits of rehearsal scenes, chatting sort of like about as character stuff, and we would get into these arguments,
Yeah.
as characters, not actual, not
Yes,
actual,
of course, of course.
but we would just go back and forth about how, about, it's like, I can't believe you did this. I'm like, you were the one who left, and then I was the one who's doing all the work, so why shouldn't I'm doing, these are things that I'm doing to protect the city. And just like, oh no, you're not protecting the city, you're the one who made us subject to Naples. And I'm like, I'm the one who kept us away from war, because at some point Naples was going to try to conquer, and so we would just go back and forth. And it's all this stuff that doesn't make it onto the stage, right? But it just feeds that relationship, and so just all those sort of like just conversations are just playing in your head when you're playing these characters. And because this is sort of like the old adage that I always try to make sure to like tell students when I'm talking to them, the villain is always the hero of their own story, and
Yes.
Antonio, now, is Antonio hungry for power? Sure. Does he also believe that he's doing what's best for the city? Also, yes.
Yes.
And I don't think that that's necessarily always the case with every sort of like villain character, but I think it's a choice that I've made. Now, when it comes to wanting to sort of kill the king and put Sebastian in charge, that sort of gets a little,
That's on the dark
iffy.
side. That's on the darker side.
Right. And I mean, I think he is seeing the sort of like, anyways, we don't need to go into that. But yeah. That is more of the dark side. But yeah, these sort of like really just fascinating conversations that happen in the back. And yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. Like Antonio really believes that like you left. I'm the one who has been keeping this going. I'm the one who's been keeping the city thriving. Why shouldn't I have it? Like,
Yes.
what reason do I have to give it back?
Interesting. So, David, looking back, and and again, obviously, the production goes on, and and will continue. But looking back about this, what I want to ask a similar question to the one I asked to Nick. What are some of the things that you take away from this deep engagement with this wonderful, amazing latest of the four great romances? What do you take away from the Tempest this time? Were you a big Tempest fan before this? Is this something that you always wanted to play in, or?
No, I actually wasn't a big Tempest fan, and actually, just briefly, one of the reasons that I wanted to do this play was because I wasn't a big fan of it. Because I'd seen it a couple times, and I was like, yeah, okay, but I remembered my experience doing The Winter's Tale with SF Shakes, and I'd seen The Winter's Tale maybe once, and I was like, okay, sure, I'll do that. But then I got a much richer understanding of it being in the play and getting to live in it. I'm like, oh, this play is great.
Yeah.
And so when the Tempest came around, I'm like, Tempest, but I'm like, you know what? If I have a chance to be in it, I bet I'm gonna be able to understand this a whole lot more. And and now I absolutely love this play.
It's interesting.
Just the themes of forgiveness are so beautiful. Even just playing Antonio and playing Antonio and Stefano, these two people who would be king in very, very different ways,
Yes.
is
Yes.
fascinating. And yeah, and just really being able to relish this opportunity to play two such different characters, and like Nick said, to be able to find the practice of switching from one to another very quickly and finding what that is. What's that thing that you can key into in 1 second, key into in the next second. And of course, just playing with this cast, it's just been absolutely, the cast and crew have been absolutely just brilliant from day one. And yeah.
Yes. Well, it's clear to the audience how deeply enmeshed the cast are with each other in a very positive way. So, Nick, before we move to questions, I want to ask one last question, which is that when Nick noted actually taking energy from and getting instruction from the audience, what's the moment that you'll take away from this production in terms of engagement with the audience? Was it during the production? Was it afterwards? What's the thing that sticks in your mind?
Is this
Yeah.
for me or
Yeah.
for Nick? Oh, for Nick.
You,
Okay,
for you.
sorry.
For you, David.
Oh, okay. Oh,
David.
yeah. Oh, sorry. It is for me, man. There's this great moment after one of the performances, um, and a patron came up to me after and was saying, "Oh, we love the show." I'm like, "Thank you," and she said, "What fun you all had."
Uh,
And that was like so fascinating to me. I'd never heard that before from an audience member.
that's wonderful. And what an encapsulation.
About yeah, just what great fun you all had. It was just, and I love that it was so evident in the audience that all of us were having so much fun together.
Yes.
And that's absolutely true, and yeah, but I'd never heard that from an audience member before. It was really cool.
That's terrific. Well, together is actually the perfect word, because now is the moment when I want to invite all of our friends and supporters on the show, on this event, to lob your questions in, to put them in the chat. Carla will start to do this, and all of our wonderful creatives, Jen and Bethany and Nick and David, will all jump in. I will probably be irrepressible as well, as I usually am from time to time. But let's discuss, Carla, some of the questions that we're getting from our friends and supporters.
Well, Dave, before we get into the questions, I do want to share out with the group because we're talking about some of the backstage stuff. This last weekend, we had a really incredibly exciting weekend that I'm sure Nick can talk about, Jen can talk about. David is now currently in Cincinnati rehearsing for Fat Ham, and this we knew, and so that role was taken over by Brennan Pickman-Thune, and we also had an understudy go on Saturday, and it was incredible how much everybody, all the folks here have played a part in making that successful. Bethany and wardrobe, they had everything ready for not only Brennan to go in and do some of the quickest changes that are in the show, but also for our understudy to be clothed beautifully, ready to go. Jen had made a point to meet up with everyone, go over music. David had helped shepherd things through, and Nick was on stage to help push and pull and be there and in support, and it worked really wonderful. And I just say kudos to everyone for that going so successfully. One of the questions early on was about Caliban, and I know that Bethany, you shared about costuming characters. You're going from Rotimi's vision and how that was, and so can you share a little bit about how what you and Rotimi discussed about the character of Caliban and how you costumed him?
Yes. So first of all, we wanted to remove a little bit of some of the language that is and the ideas of being a monster, right, and being disformed and those things, and not lean into that in any way, shape, or form. And also, Rotimi had given me this image of this guy like in the mud with like a fire torch in his hand, like just being a part of the land, and so I was like, okay, well, this feels really a lot like Swamp People. I don't know if anyone's seen the show, but I was obsessed with the show for a while. It's really fun to watch. And so I was like, I feel like Caliban is a swamp person. Like that's who he is on this island, right? And within this island. And so that's why I don't know if anyone sees it, but it was kind of important to me. He's wearing Crocs, and they're camouflage Crocs, but they're like swamp camouflage Crocs. But then I also had to deal with the fact that he's Sebastian. And so initially Rotimi was like, oh, cargo shorts. I was like, I can't fit those under suit pants, and he has to get changed real quick. Landed on these like more tracksuity shorts, and then I really wanted to lean into the island of it. And so I found this great graphic shirt, and then I cut off the sleeves, and then I took my airbrush to it. And it's not like over the top, but if you really notice, it's like sweaty pits, and like there's holes on the neckline, and it's got like holes in the bottom of the shirt. Like he's had it a while, right? Like this is his shirt. He wears it all the time, kind of a thing. So I was trying to lean into this island person who doesn't really care about their fashion, very juxtaposed to our business suit people. And the straw hat has been funny because I pulled it. It's a rented item, but I actually think I might have pulled it from SF Shakes, which is why I wasn't worried about it. But like as tech progressed, it just kept getting more damaged. And I was like, I don't care. It looks great. Like let it keep deteriorating as it goes, like, because it works for the character. So it's just the straw hat is like progressively lost its straw hatness as it continues on.
It's fascinating in the sense that it's very much in accord with Rotimi's vision overarching about the idea of forgiveness and redemption, that Caliban is not dressed as a monster. I mean, that's really an important element of what Nick and David were talking about, and much of what Jen has put into the music, as Jen and Justin have put into the music as well, it is not the only way that Caliban gets presented. I think it's a really wonderful and morally instructive way to present Caliban. It really worked out well, Bethany.
And I think we leaned into it with the accent, right? If I'm correct,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
He's been kind of doing more of like a Florida backwoods,
Yes.
kind of accent with it. And so it all just kind of went together. And I personally like this version of Caliban. Like,
If he had a vehicle, it'd be a pickup with a lever action rifle in the window.
Yep.
David.
Yeah, Daniel. I just wanted to mention one thing too, not to be off a topic a little bit, but it just came up to me when you were talking about the theme of forgiveness and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you think that you sort of understand like a character and a moment and things like that, and sometimes what I love about acting is that sometimes in this process your a fellow actor can bring something in that can really just crystallize something for you.
Yep.
And the moment at the end of the play where Prospero forgives Antonio, like I thought okay, I know that moment, I understood it, but then Idris was like, no, it needs something more. I'm trying to build something, and then so Idris is like, okay, let me try something, and then we try this one time in rehearsal, and then I'm just like, okay, yeah, like that's, you know what I mean? It's like it was like this button that I didn't even know existed, that the scene needed. And it's like and it's like so wonderful. And like at that point, I'm just along for the ride. I'm trying to, like, bolster that moment as much as much as I can. But I just love how Idris just, found that extra deeper, something. And it's just a really beautiful moment. And I just wanted to highlight it because it was amazing, but also I just wanted to bring it up because one thing that I forgot to say about Antonio is that there is that the reason that film works is that there is this sort of undercurrent of resentment that sort of drives everything that Antonio does. And when he gets that, that forgiveness from his brother, like the importance of having that title kind of falls away.
Yes. It's so interesting, David, because that goes right back to some of the things that Nick was saying about the extent to which this cast's energy flowed together and augmented each of your work in these roles. Carla, what other questions do we have from our friends and supporters?
Well, we have some questions about. I don't know if during our dramaturg conversations early on, folks talked about Forbidden Planet, but we have our assistant director, Eli Sunny Orquiza, who is also our dramaturg. We had a script workshop where we look we gather folks together, they read through the script really to just get a feel for what the cut is, how long it is, talk about certain things, flesh certain things out. And I'm not sure if you all talked about Forbidden Planet. Another question that from a previous, from a submitted question prior to was, how long did we have to get to know each other? And Ron, you said something like, folks seem like, it felt to me as if the actors had been in these roles forever. How long did they actually have to work together and build those relationships? Well, folks were cast in, January, February. Some of them we already knew from December. We're like, yep, this is going to happen. And then rehearsing in June is when we had folks in the room for 3 weeks in a rehearsal room. 40 hours a week. And then we were off to Cupertino where we teched and did the show. And someone else had posted in a previous question, like, is there anyone backstage to help these poor actors? Yes, there are. We have an incredible crew made up of professionals, also interns. We have an incredible intern group this year, and we have two sound and music interns. We have two costume wardrobe interns, as well as a wardrobe supervisor. We have two stage management interns, and everyone is doing some incredible work to make these quick changes to help these actors. We have two prop interns who have been working on all the props that we're talking about. Yeah, so much. It is 12:56, but there's one question that I saw that was sent in earlier, and I know it's going to be a hard one, y'all. What favorite moments do you have that are your personal favorite moment in the show?
And we want to hear from each of you, from Jen, from Bethany, from David, and from Nick.
I mean, I think mine is obvious. It's the goddesses. It's the mask. It's the play within the play. Like, it's so good. I had the most fun. I mean, those headdresses, like I go to a craft night once a month with friends, and I just like brought a bunch of things and just sat down with a hot glue gun and like went to town. So like those headdresses were made with, with love in a group setting, while I got to just tinker and body double and play with people. So
Wonderful. Jen, what about you? What's your favorite moment?
I mean, I love the whole show, but the goddess song for me as well is definitely the cream of it. There's a part after they're singing and they start leading everybody in a dance, and to look around the audience and see everybody engaged and getting into it is just really fulfilling and just really fun.
Nick, what about you?
Right now, what I'm thinking is Prospero's "We Are of Such Stuff as Dreams Are Made On" speech. I'm right there behind, and it's a beautiful moment where I get to not be in my head as an actor thinking about all the blocking and changes and whatever, and really just get to sit and focus and listen to like one of the most beautiful pieces of poetry ever written.
David, what about you?
Yeah, so hard. I think that it's really it's been really fun. The moment where Antonio says, like, yeah, you supplanted your brother Prospero, and he's like, and look how well my garments fit upon me, what much feeder than before. Like that little bit, that bit is always really sort of stands out to me, because sometimes I get hisses from the audience, and that's just the best. The audience hate you. Oh, it's so good.
Awesome. Exactly. There was one question, Carla, that I saw that I did want to mention for a moment, just because I'm an antiquarian about Shakespeareana as well. And one of our friends and supporters had asked us about sort of gender roles and gender casting and how we approach that. And we're quite fluid about that, as we think we should be. We look for talent rather than category when we're casting. And this is a huge credit to our artistic director and to our general company culture. But it's really worth mentioning that this is another one of those things which, in my mind, harkens back 400 years to the place where these plays were born and were originally presented at the Globe. And of course, at the time, in Elizabethan law, women were not permitted to appear on stage. The parts of women were played by young boys. In sort of graduated ways. Boys would start with the company very young, and then at some point would graduate to playing male roles because it was no longer credible to dress them in women's clothing. But there are so many intentional moments of gender fluidity in Shakespeare, where you literally have, where you would have had in an Elizabethan audience, you'd have a boy playing a girl playing a boy in this, that, you know, the way we do this seems like it's very well grounded in the way the work proceeded at the Globe in 1590. So I always take great pleasure in that. It's worth noting. Do any of our wonderful creatives have anything that you would like to share before we break and let our audience go back to their offices or places of work, or just take a nap after listening to us? Bethany, anything you want to share?
No, I just have really had a wonderful experience. This is my first year with SF Shakes and hopefully not my last. I really enjoyed it. It was obviously a huge challenge. I've never looked at a measurement plot, which is like kind of how I find all my looks, right? Because I have all their measurements, basic measurements in front of me, and had my brain so twisted because of it only being 9 actors plus the understudies, and like how many costumes that actually ended up being, and that they all have to switch back and switch back and switch back. Like I just, every time I'd like go to pull, it was like, this hurts. like Benjamin, like Bill has like 8 costumes, and he did get to
Right.
use them, but like also could have never used them, you know? So it's
Yes.
like, it's kind of cuckoo crazy, but it was a fun challenge. I just had to like keep wrapping my brain
Terrific.
around all the different people playing all the different roles.
Terrific. Jen, how about you? What would you like to share as we begin to part?
Yeah, I just think it's been such a joy to work with this company. It's been such a diverse group of talents and abilities coming together. And when you go see the show, you can see how richly developed it is. And even from what you can tell, there are layers and layers built underneath it. And it just takes a whole community of people coming together. And I'm just honored to be a part of it and to collaborate with everyone.
David, how about you?
Just to say on that last point that you were making, it has long been part of the mission of SF Shakes for the actors on stage to reflect the Bay Area community around us. And so as we continue to learn more about the beautiful breadth of our community when it comes to income, gender, background, everything, the people that we have on stage are going to continue to reflect that breadth.
Wonderful.
So that's one of the things that I love about this company.
Nick?
Kind of on the same note of talking about the interaction and the reflection of the community. After each show, it's lovely to go out into the audience and to see the people who are being affected by this. And like, this is a tiny little tangent. There was this little girl who came to 3 performances so far in Redwood City, and her mom says she's going to come back next week. And she asks her mom every day if they can go see the Shakespeare play in the park. And she can't be she's 6 or 7 years old. I think in instances like that, and there's been so many with this production, really just reinforce the significance of free, accessible Shakespeare and theater and art for everybody, regardless of background.
Well, I would just like to say, from the perspective of the board, that we owe an enormous debt. The warp and weft of this production is some of the wonderful creatives whom we've brought to you to see today. It is the work that Rotimi Agbabiaka, one of the most talented young directors who is going places in American theater for sure, but also the work of our wonderful artistic director, Carla Pantoja, who is the orchestra conductor behind the scenes for all of that, and Toby Levitt, who leads this organization in a wonderful way. So with that, I want to thank our creatives for joining us. I want to thank our audience for joining in with this, and we look forward to seeing you when we go to talk with Professor Green at Stanford. That may be a little less freewheeling, I suspect, if it's a Stanford English professor.
Thank you all so much.
Let's do an internet round of applause for Bethany, Jen, David, and Nick. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for joining us again for Let's Talk About session. We are, as it's been posted, I believe, where we're going next. We're still in Redwood City this coming weekend at 6 o'clock. And then we go on to San Francisco at McLaren Park from Saturday, August 31st until Sunday, September 8th. And stay tuned for another location
Yes, stay tuned. Stay
announcement
tuned,
coming
guys.
up. And if you can join us in the park, please do so. If what you've heard here has moved you, and what we do is so important, and I just thank you, Nick, David, Bethany, Jen. What we do is so important, and it's so lovely to hear about the little girl who keeps coming back, because I think all of us have stories just like that working with SF Shakes. And if you believe in what we do, and you believe in who we are, and us going out into different communities providing free Shakespeare performances for folks, and if you are so inclined, you can please donate. Consider a donation to support our work at SF Shakes, sfshakes.org/donate. Thank you so much again for giving us your lunch hour, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you.
Guys, bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Carla. Bye, David.
Bye.
Love y'all.
Oh.
Toby. I hadn't seen you there.
Was bopping between two webinars. Ours and something much less fun.
All right.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Kirk. Thank you, Andrea. Alan.
Bye,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Toby, let's talk this afternoon.
Sounds good.